My name is Sanam Jorjani. I'm one of the founding co-executive directors of the Oakland Literacy Coalition. So on behalf of the OLC on my team, welcome to Oakland and welcome to Literacy and Justice for All. For those of you who were with us last night, I hope you got a chance to enjoy a little bit of Oakland before you went to bed, got some rest. And for those of you just coming in today, we're happy you're here. We started Literacy and Justice for All in 2021. This is our third year, so we are finally getting into this third year of this event, and I will say it is just such a joy to see it grow, to see so many folks coming from not just here in Oakland, but really beyond the Bay Area, California. I think we have a few folks from outside of California, so extra special welcome to you for making that journey. But first of all, just give yourselves a round of applause for being here with us on a Saturday. I know you all have busy weeks. We started this conference really because, we're the Oakland Literacy Coalition, so the majority of our work for about a dozen years has been really focused on Oakland, improving literacy and reading outcomes in our city, specifically by thinking about how do we cultivate, nurture, and support an ecosystem of support. So from our schools to really beyond, knowing there are numerous programs and individuals and just in our families that reading and literacy happens everywhere, and that it's so many people who are working towards the same goal. And so it kind of felt like a natural progression to think about what does building a conference, even if we are the Oakland Literacy Coalition, that recognizes that the mission we all share, I imagine many of you would buy into our organizational mission of ensuring every child learns and loves to read, that is far beyond what we're doing here in Oakland, that so many people are doing that the ability to collaborate and connect with one another is how we do our work. Learn, collaborate, champion has always been kind of the three pillars of the OLC. Thinking about how do we go deep with folks who are doing the work and practicing the work towards literacy outcomes, and how do we make sure we feel like a cohesive and aligned and connected ecosystem at the same time. So being able to do that at a scale of folks really connecting in and across and beyond Oakland is really exciting for us. In the 12 years I've been with the Oakland Literacy Coalition, I think one of the things I've really learned but continue to see proof points around is that we can't go it alone. That really no one of us is gonna get us out of the really crisis we see of too many of our kids not being able to get what they need to become readers and lifelong learners. And so the collaborate part of our work is very much honoring that piece, that it is gonna take not just many, but many working in the many ways that you work, right? That it's gonna take strategies inside of the school, it's gonna take strategies outside of the school, that kids are learning and being nurtured by adults in all kinds of spaces, whether they're at home, they're in play-based programs, or they are in their school-based programs. There are the many, and I think all of you are really a testament to that. I'm really, as I think about kind of the conversation we had last night in our fireside chat, conversations I've had just with folks in the hallways over the last 2 days, I'm really inspired consistently by the folks and the leaders who really continue to say, I learned different, so I do different. And that's really been the inspiring, I think, part for us to say, we all want that for our kids, right? We want them to keep learning, keep being lifelong learners, keep being able to have that curiosity and say, oh, I learned something new, I need to try something new. And how, in a way, our kids are the ones who model that for us, right? They're the ones who model consistently like, okay, I have new information and now how do I move and use that to navigate the world differently? And so my hope as we head in, and our really goal as we head into the next day, is that we all bring that same curiosity with us, and we all think about the ways that we share what we know with others, and that we all are able to say, okay, if there was something different, how do I move and work differently for our children? The one big kind of question we hope we ask over the next day, and started definitely with last night, is how do we advance the right to read for every child? how do we connect the work that we do around literacy and see it as a social justice issue, one of the big social justice issues of our time? And how does literacy advance other movements for social justice? How is the work so many of you are doing helping us get our community and our society to the place that we want to go, where they are nurtured and thriving? So with that, I want to start today by thanking some of our very special headline sponsors who I'm really happy to say we have 3 headline sponsors, and all of them have been sponsors with us from the very beginning, so have been investing in ensuring that we can not just make this event possible, but they have been deeply investing in the work in Oakland. They share the impact, the vision of the impact that we believe this symposium can have. The Hellman Foundation and the Kenneth Rainin Foundation have each been so invested in literacy in our community from early childhood, and in fact are in many ways educators to our community as all. We have these really great network of informed funders who are really also bringing expertise into the field. They've been a model of trust-based philanthropy and willing to partner deeply and authentically with grantees in the work for systemic change and building community capacity that's needed to make significant and sustained progress. We're also deeply, deeply appreciated of the work of Stefan and Aisha Curry's Eat, Learn, Play Foundation for galvanizing new resources and bringing new attention to literacy as the focus of their Learn pillar. They have set a bold vision to ensure that every Oakland elementary school student has the support and resources to become proficient readers by the end of 3rd grade, which they approach with a commitment to both quality and joy. And that's very much a shared ethos of the work we do at the Oakland Literacy Coalition. If you've had a chance to see the Eat, Learn, Play bus out in the community, you'll know what I mean. It's this beautiful, bold, colorful bus that brings joy as well as bringing books and food to schools, to different folks in our community. We're deeply grateful to the Eat, Learn, Play Foundation as a key funder of our work and as a programmatic partner and as a strategic partner in ensuring every Oakland child learns and loves to read. So to share a little bit more about their focus on Oakland and commitment to literacy, it is my pleasure to invite Courtney Harvey, the Vice President of Operations for the Eat, Learn, Play Foundation.
Good morning. Whenever I have the pleasure of speaking on behalf of the Eat, Learn, Play Foundation, I always know the first thing people are thinking of, I really wish Stefan and Aisha Curry were here. So thank you for masking your disappointment, especially this morning. I really am very excited to get to be here today. Would you be excited to know, though, that I am an excellent 3-point shooter and chef? These things are all not true. As I found out, I am not a sports person, and so when I started working with the organization, they give a lot of high fives, and I found out that I'm actually only 60-40 on catching a high five. And in terms of being a chef, people have described my cooking as extremely mediocre. So, hoping that I know something about literacy, I was excited to tell my mom, who's visiting today, that I was getting to be at this conference. And she said, well, honey, that's so great because you were a Tier 2 reader. And I was like, wait, I thought that was like extra special story time in my mind. But no, apparently it was small group tutoring. You know, I think you're probably thinking, why is this very young 4-year-old foundation and this maybe very middle-aged, inexperienced person talking to you here about literacy? I'm not at all. I quite simply am here to learn from you. And that's really the investment we made with Oakland Literacy Coalition and with a symposium today. It was simply to get to be in your presence and to hear all of the wonderful things that you are up to do so we can learn and be a better partner with you all. I don't want to be hyperbolic here, but when we learned about the reading rates for kids, we've been carrying along with you the sense of moral injury, that we absolutely have to do something with this data. And this is a collection of the smartest and hardest working people, not just in Oakland, but in the country and around the world working on this topic. Having lived in a number of different communities across the states, the one thing that really surprises me about Oakland is that it is flush with talent and leadership and enormous, incredible organizations that are doing all of the right things. And so when we started in this space, we got a warm welcome from Oakland Literacy Coalition and a warning that we weren't to start anything new. They were like, you can hand out free books, but until you know something, everybody else is doing the great work already, and your best role could be finding and supporting the people that are already doing the work. And so over the past few years, we've been working on the book and joy side, but we've also been quietly working with Oakland Unified School District and a lot of the tutoring organizations, many here today, on some of those questions about what if. We know that giving away free books is not going to get kids to read, and it's nice, but if they can't read them, then it doesn't go very far. And so our what ifs are, what if these kids can actually read? What if there was a plan that the district had to cover all of the tutoring gaps for all of the students that needed them? What if tutors were actually paid the amount that they work? What if there were real support for teachers and principals implementing this work on top of the enormous jobs they already have, not just in education, but as social care providers for our kids? What if there was a stronger planning and coordination between the organizations on the ground so we weren't duplicating work, but really being much more effective with our dollars? What if resources really weren't a problem or a limitation here? So for us today, we're here to ask all of those what if questions with the people that have all of the answers. We're here today at the symposium because you are here, and because this is a community, and because we're a team. And you have, by your tireless, relentless work to show up for these kids, inspired us to be here with you. So thank you so much over the past few years for welcoming us to your community. It is such an honor and delight this morning to really welcome you here and be part of the team with OLC to welcome you to the symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. And it's good to know someone else is really bad at high fives. I practice, and I'm still really bad at high fives. It is also my pleasure to introduce our keynote for today. We feel so lucky and blessed to be able to have Emily Hanford with us this morning. I'll share a few things about Emily. Many of you, I believe, have already been touched by Emily's reporting via articles and podcasts. If you're like me, you've shared it with everybody you know, whether they are interested at all in this topic or not. I tend to invite people to listen to the podcasts specifically with the, even if you're not a policy wonk, even if you're not, a literacy person, I think this one will resonate. And quite often the answer is, oh, it really, really did. Emily is the host of the hit podcast Sold a Story. It's the second most shared podcast on Apple Podcasts in 2023, and one of Time Magazine's top 3 podcasts of the year. It very much deserves all of that. They've received some of the highest awards in journalism, including a Peabody nomination, and I can say for the hard words and the pre-Sold a Story podcast work that Emily did to really, I think in many ways, bring to the greater public, I think many of you probably knew, what was happening in literacy, but to bring an awareness to the greater public in a way that, again, can resonate even if it's not the thing you've seen every day or the work that you were doing, but to really shine a light on not just, hey, there's probably a problem going on, but we at least might know one of the reasons that's contributing to that problem. And I know for our organization, Emily's work in, I think it was 2018, was really something that when we brought to kind of our team to dig into and read the articles, we shared it with our members in our coalition. It was really transformative in the way that some of us were thinking about both, oh, what's really going on, and also, I think Cassie said this yesterday, like we've been making some big bets around all the ways we need to support literacy that over the last 10, 20 years were built on some assumptions around some things already happening and already being in place. And so as a coalition that works largely kind of in the space beyond school, at least originally, we really doubled down and thought about how do we shift our work to still be active and engaged around what is happening in school and around schools, not just kind of in our community-based coalition. So I thank you personally, because it really did transform our approach and in many ways contributed to why we do this conference, to really saying, how do we build, not just think about our smaller Oakland member coalition, but really think bigger and think more specifically around how we need to support systems and systems also impacting our schools to improve literacy. So again, I think Emily is an expert, frequent moderator, frequent speaker. We feel so lucky to have you here with us today, and I will hand it over to you. So join me in welcoming Emily Hanford to the stage.
Good morning. How are you? Thank you very much for that nice introduction. I'm a little shorter. Thanks for having me. Here's what I'm going to do this morning to start off the day. I am going to share some very basic information about how children learn to read, and I think a lot of you know this already. In fact, I know there are many people in the room who have heard me talk about this already. But I always like to start with a really basic understanding of how kids learn to read. I think it's a really important place to begin, because I think this is what was missing for so many teachers and parents for a really long time. How do kids learn to read? How does that even work? So I'm going to do that first, and then I'm going to tell you how I got interested in how kids learn to read and what led me to make the Sold a Story podcast. And then I'm going to share some thoughts and observations about what's happened in response to Sold a Story and where to go from here. So, to begin, how do kids learn to read? So I'm sure many of you have seen a version of this equation. It's called the simple view of reading. And I think one of the most important things to say about the simple view of reading is that it does not say that reading is simple, right? To the contrary, reading is actually really complex. But the simple view of reading is basically a simple model to understand this really complex process. So it was first proposed a really long time ago, in 1986, by two researchers, Philip Goff and William Tunmer. And they proposed it for a reason. They were trying to clarify the role of decoding in reading comprehension. Because everyone agrees that the goal of reading is to comprehend text. The reason to teach a child to read is so that child can understand text, right? Everyone agrees on that. But the question is, how does a little kid get there? How does a kid get to reading comprehension? So the simple view says that reading comprehension is the product of two things. So one is your ability to read the words, and initially that means decoding the words. You see the letter string R-E-A-D-I-N-G, and you know that that string of letters represents the word reading. And then there's this other part of the equation, and that's your language comprehension. So that is your ability to understand spoken language. We are not talking about your ability to read texts, right? So language comprehension is your ability to understand meaning when someone is reading out loud or when someone is talking to you. So for example, when someone says to you she is reading the book, you know what the verb means in that sentence. You know what she's doing. So what the simple view says is that if you have really good language comprehension skills, but you have a hard time reading the words, your decoding skills aren't good, your reading comprehension is going to be 0 because 0 times anything is 0. But what the simple view also says is that if you have good decoding skills, but you don't have good language comprehension skills, you just don't know the meaning of many words in spoken language, your reading comprehension is not going to be very good either. Now, most kids when they enter school, have very little when it comes to the decoding part of this equation. They have 0 or close to 0 when it comes to the D in the simple view of reading equation. But they do have something when it comes to the language comprehension part of the equation. Now, there is often a difference between the language a child speaks at home and the language a child is learning how to read and speak in school. So this is going to have an impact on learning to read in English. But the simple view of reading equation holds true across languages. So I'm going to take you through the rest of this example, assuming that we are talking about a child who speaks English at home and is being taught to read English in school. So this child comes into school and knows the meaning of many words in English, but what this child doesn't know how to do yet is read the words that she knows how to say. So this is why people who are familiar with the science of reading, so-called, and I'll get back to that, this is why they call for an emphasis on phonics instruction or decoding instruction in the early grades. Because if the goal is to get to reading comprehension, and you have a bunch of 5- and 6-year-olds who have some language comprehension skills, but virtually no decoding skills, what do you need to do to help those children get to reading comprehension? You need to help those children develop decoding skills. But the simple view clearly shows that focusing only on decoding would be a very, very big mistake. And as everyone knows, even kids who speak English as a first language come into school with very different language comprehension skills, right? Some kids know a lot about language. They know the meaning of lots and lots and lots of words. They're very, very precocious 5-year-olds out there. And then some kids, for a wide variety of reasons, have far more limited vocabularies and language comprehension ability. So reading instruction that aligns with the simple view has to focus on the language comprehension part of the equation too. So that means lessons, activities, instruction that expand children's oral vocabularies. So I was in a first grade classroom several years ago here in Oakland, where reading instruction was deliberately aligned with the simple view equation. And what I saw in this class was explicit phonics instruction in one part of the reading instruction, and the kids were broken into small groups depending on the level of their decoding skills, because kids are at very different places with those skills. And another part of the reading instruction was explicit vocabulary lessons and lots of reading out loud by the teacher and lots of discussion among the kids. And the words that the kids had been learning in the language comprehension part of their instruction were posted on cards all over the classroom. And this was like around March of the year. And so there are these cards everywhere. They were starting to cover the windows. And they included words like extraordinary and gigantic and neighborly and ridiculous. So those are not words that the vast majority of kids in first grade are going to be able to decode or should be expected to. But the first graders who were in this class were learning the pronunciation and meaning of those words so that when they're able to decode them, they'll know what the words mean. And and that will help them with decoding, right? All of this stuff works together. The more words you know, that facilitates the process of learning how to decode words. As a child is laboriously sounding out a word, then they hear it. It's a word they know, and they've got it. They just decoded the word. Conversely, a child might be laboriously sounding out a word, expedite. Maybe they got it, but they don't know they got it because they don't know the meaning of that word. They don't know what expedite means. So as I said, the simple view was proposed as a theoretical model back in 1986. And the basics of the model have been confirmed over and over and over again since by lots of research. And I think the simple view is very helpful because it disentangles some of the stuff that is most contentious in all the debates about reading, right? In what's known as the whole language view and in the balanced literacy view more recently, the focus right from the start of reading instruction should be on getting little kids to focus on the meaning of what they're reading. So whole language and balanced literacy are known as meaning emphasis approaches to reading instruction, as opposed to what's known as a code emphasis approach, which emphasizes decoding skills at the beginning of reading instruction. Now, everyone agrees that meaning is the goal, but the question again is, how does a little kid get there? So this is something else that I'm sure most of you have seen. It's known as Scarborough's rope, and you probably know that Hollis Scarborough is a person. And she started studying reading development back in the 1980s. And I think Scarborough's rope is really helpful because it unpacks what goes into each side of the equation that was put forth in the simple view. So what you can see is that the upper strand, actually the thicker part of the rope, is language comprehension. This model shows that language comprehension is complex, right? It's not just all the words you know the meaning of in spoken language. It's also your level of knowledge. It's the stuff you know. It's your understanding of how language works, language structure and grammar, and your ability to make inferences and understand metaphors and similes. So this is a more nuanced explanation of what goes into the language comprehension part of the simple view equation. And I think it can really help teachers and parents understand what might be going on when a child is decoding well, but the child is struggling with reading comprehension, right? Very often that child has a language comprehension issue. Now, the lower strand of Scarborough's rope is the word recognition strand. So like the simple view of reading, Scarborough's rope shows that without good word recognition skills, you are not going to become a skilled reader. And the rope unpacks the various skills and abilities that go into word recognition. And here you can see that one element of word recognition, just one, is decoding. That is basically your phonics knowledge. Do you have a good understanding of how letters and combinations of letters represent the sounds in words? So if you teach the basic letter-sound combinations in the English language to kids, it will give them access to successfully sounding out more than 80% of the words in English. That's a lot, but it's not all. Children really need more than just basic phonics knowledge to be successful with written English. That's why I think it's much more useful to think about teaching children how their written language works. Because English spelling is not just based on the sounds and words. English is what's known as a morphophonemic language. That means our spelling patterns are based on sounds and meaning. So to understand English spelling, morphology is really, really necessary. In other words, for kids to understand the meaningful parts of words and how words are put together in English. And etymology is really helpful and really interesting too. So to understand English spelling, it really helps to know something about the history of the English language. So English has a reputation for being this wacky language that's full of all kinds of exceptions, but really it's not. It's this melting pot language that has complex spelling patterns because English has roots in lots and lots of languages: Greek and Latin and Anglo-Saxon and French and German and Native American languages. Written English is one of the most difficult alphabetic languages to learn. It can take 2 or 3 years for a typically developing kid who's getting some good instruction to master the basics of written English. In contrast, it typically takes only a few months for most kids in Italy to be taught how to decode Italian, because Italian spelling is almost perfectly regular. Italian is spelled the way it sounds, and Spanish is too. I think one of the reasons that we have fought so much about reading instruction in the English-speaking world is because there is a lot to teaching children written English. So there's a lot for teachers to know, and there's a lot to argue about in terms of how to teach it, right? Now back to Scarborough's rope and the elements of the word recognition strand. So there's phonological awareness, understanding the sounds in words. There's decoding, understanding how letters represent those sounds. And then there's sight recognition. This is where I think things get really interesting and have been very misunderstood. When you are a skilled reader, you don't actually have to decode most of the words that you encounter. When you see a word that's familiar to you, you know that word. You know it immediately on sight. You don't have to consciously decode it. You're not consciously sounding it out. Scientists refer to the words that are instantly recognizable to you as sight words. But that term, sight words, can be really confusing because teachers and reading scientists usually mean different things when they're using that term. So in schools, sight words are typically words that kids are supposed to memorize. So they might be words with unusual spellings that are difficult to decode, or they may be words that kids are going to come across a lot in their reading, in other words, high-frequency words. And in English, those words are often the same. Most of our most common words come from Anglo-Saxon, and they are pronounced really differently than they were back then. And that's why the spelling seems so nutty sometimes. So what happens is that children often get these long lists of sight words and they're supposed to memorize them. But what the scientific research has shown is that having kids memorize lots and lots of words isn't the best path to good word recognition skills. And it turns out that weak word recognition skills are a really common and really debilitating source of reading problems. Struggling readers may also have language comprehension issues, often they do. But when children do not get off to a good start with decoding, it has an impact on the continued development of their language comprehension. And eventually, kids may actually be weak on the language comprehension side because they're weak on the word recognition side. And this problem has been described as the Matthew effect, which is a biblical reference. So basically, when it comes to reading, the rich get richer, and it happens fast. Here's how it works. If you come into school with lots of language comprehension, but you struggle with learning how to decode those words, your ability to continue to develop language comprehension may be impeded because one of the best ways to increase your knowledge and your vocabulary and your reasoning and your understanding of the structure of language is through reading. In contrast, if you come into school weak on the language comprehension side, but you're taught how to decode words, you have just been given the gift that is your best bet for gaining knowledge and vocabulary because you can read the words. This is why equity in education begins with good decoding instruction in the early grades. I think it's one of the most important things that teachers and schools can do to try to even the playing field between kids who come from homes that give them an edge, a very significant edge often, on the language comprehension side, and kids who come from homes that may not be as rich and resourced when it comes to vocabulary development, access to lots and lots of knowledge, right? So good decoding instruction is one of the places where educational equity begins. It doesn't end there, but it is such a critical foundation. So now I'm going to move to part 2 of this talk. That's just the basics of how kids learn to read. There's so much more to it, but those frameworks, I think, are really helping people have these aha moments that have been missing for years. So part 2 of this talk is how did I get interested in all of this? So let me start by saying that I knew nothing about any of this for most of my life. I never really thought much about how people learn to read. I think learning to read was pretty easy for me. So this is me in the 1st grade. Obviously, my mother had no say in what I wore to school, even on picture day. So this was a very long time ago. I don't remember being taught how to read. I do remember 1st grade because I loved it. I especially loved my teacher. Her name was Molly. We called all our teachers by their first names. This was public school in Massachusetts in the 1970s. And I actually thought Birkenstocks were part of a teacher's uniform because they all wore them. I thought it was required. They wore them with wool socks during the winter. And I was absolutely in love with my teacher, Molly. 1st grade teachers, you know that many of your kids just love you. And Molly was especially awesome because she brought her guitar to school and she sang songs with us every day. And she let us set up a pretend bakery in the hall. And one day she brought in an electric popcorn popper and she popped the popcorn with the lid off and it went all over the floor and she let us eat it off the floor. Right? Another thing that Molly did was she read chapter books to us every day. At the end of every day, she read out loud to us. James and the Giant Peach, Farmer Boy, Danny the Champion of the World, Charlotte's Web, lots and lots of books. My parents read a lot to me too. But like I said, I don't remember being taught how to read. I think it just kind of happened. And that's the way it was with my kids too. So these are my boys. I have 2 boys. This was their first day of school when the little one was starting kindergarten and the older one was starting 3rd grade. Sorry, they're Celtics fans. And Patriots. This was a long time ago because these guys are now about to turn 21 and about to turn 24. When my kids went off to school, I didn't think about how they were going to be taught to read, and I certainly didn't think about whether they were going to be taught to read. I just assumed that they would. And they did learn to read pretty easily, especially my younger son. So this is my little guy, Oliver, and this is a picture that was taken a few months after he started kindergarten, and he's reading a Magic Treehouse book, and I have no idea how he learned to do that, really no idea. And school was a good experience for this kid, and it was for my older son, and it was for me too. I loved school. And there were lots of reasons that all of us had a good experience in school, lots of reasons. But I think one reason is that we all learned to read pretty easily. But here's what I didn't know. Lots of people don't learn to read easily. And it doesn't have to do with intelligence. right? There are very, very smart people, very smart children in our schools right now who struggle to learn how to read. They can learn to read, but they need someone. They must have someone teach them how to do it. And a lot of them don't get the instruction they need in school. Now, I didn't know this. I was an education reporter for about 10 years before I started thinking about how kids learn to read and how they were being taught. Most of the reporting that I had been doing was about secondary and post-secondary education, because what I was most interested in was the ways that education can contribute to social mobility or not. I wanted to know how schooling helps people move out of poverty. How powerful a force is it? Could it be a more powerful force? And I knew that a lot of that story was at the high school and college level, because post-secondary degrees matter so much in our economy. They matter so much in our world today. So I wanted to know who is being prepared to take advantage of post-secondary education, who is getting into college, who is persisting in college, why not? What are schools doing to make sure that kids are able to get post-secondary degrees? And then I met college students who told me about their struggles with basic reading and writing skills. I was doing a reporting project about remedial education in college, and I was observing all these students in class, and I was watching them struggle, and I was talking to their instructors. And I had this one really amazing interview with a student who'd been in one of these remedial reading classes. This was a college class for struggling readers, and she told me she couldn't read. She said she couldn't read, she'd never been taught how to read, and she didn't know how to do it. She told me that she did have these strategies that she used to try to get through text. So there were a certain number of words that she had just memorized, words that she saw all the time. They were like pictures in her head. She knew what they looked like, common words she saw all the time. Then there were all these other words, and she would basically guess what they were. She would look at the first couple of letters, think about something that made sense. But the problem was she couldn't actually come up with a very good guess a lot of the time. She also didn't really know if she was right or not, so she just skipped a lot of words. And this way of reading was really time-consuming. It was really hard. It was really confusing. And she couldn't really focus on the meaning of what she was reading because she was struggling so much with the words. So her main strategy was to avoid reading. She just didn't do it. She had a sister who was just a little bit older than she was, who would read stuff out loud to her, and that's basically how she got through school and graduated from high school and ended up in college struggling in this remedial reading class. This was back in 2017, and it ended up being a really big turning point in my career and in my life, because I got really interested in this question of how people learn to read. And it turns out there's a whole lot you can read about that. Thousands of pages of books and articles, and my reading skills really came in handy. I started reading tons and tons of stuff, and I started talking to people. Scientists and parents. Those were the two groups of people that I was learning the most from at first. So let me start with the scientists and the so-called science of reading, because it's a term that lots of people are using these days. And so what does that mean? What is the science of reading? So this is a definition from one person, cognitive scientist Mark Seidenberg. He's been studying reading since the disco days. That's how he puts it in his bio. So in other words, the 1970s, when I was in first grade. Here is Mark's definition of the science of reading. So the science of reading is a body of basic research in developmental psychology, educational psychology, cognitive science, and cognitive neuroscience on reading, one of the most complex human behaviors, and its biological bases. This research has been conducted for decades in the United States and around the world. This research has important implications for helping children to succeed, but it has not been incorporated in how teachers are trained for the job or how children are taught. So one of the first things to say about this definition is the science of reading is not phonics. The word phonics isn't even in the definition. Every time reading instruction rises to widespread national consciousness, like it is again right now, the conversation tends to end up getting focused on phonics. But this, as I'm sure you all know, is about much more than phonics. It's about all that stuff that I told you about at the beginning. Language comprehension and decoding skill and knowledge, the stuff you know, and your understanding of how language works. It's all of that. Something else to notice about this definition that I'm going here. So this is, the science of reading is a body of basic research, right? It's not a program, it's not a curriculum, it's not a thing you do, it's not a thing you buy, it's not a law you pass. It's a body of research. Also, the science of reading has been conducted for decades. That's a long time. We've known this for a long time, but we haven't known this forever. And we have been arguing about how to teach kids to read for a really long time. You can find crazy, nasty fights about how to teach reading going all the way back to the beginning of public education in this country. And I think one of the reasons we fought about how to teach kids to read is because no one really knew for sure how kids learn to read and how reading works. How do we do that? No one really knew the answer to that question. This is what has changed. Starting in the 1970s and 80s, there was this explosion of research on reading, much of it led by cognitive scientists. Science is never done. The quest to learn new things continues. There is more to figure out. There are questions to be answered. But there are basic things about reading that scientists agree on. There are things that have been settled, like you can't be a good reader without being good at sounding out those written words. And sounding out written words is a skill that requires some instruction. And that's because we are not born with brains that are wired to read. We can get really, really good at reading, but learning to read is not quite like learning to speak. Speaking is something that we can learn through being surrounded by spoken language, but reading doesn't work that way. We aren't born with brains that are designed to do it, and that's because human beings invented written language kind of recently, just a few thousand years ago. And that is really recently in the course of development. Like, we've been talking to each other for a very, very long time. Well, we just invented reading and writing, it's kind of a new thing. So children need to be taught how their written language works. Now, some children need very little instruction, like me and my kids. And some children need a lot of instruction. And again, it doesn't have to do with intelligence. There are lots of smart people who struggle to learn how to read. They need instruction, though, and too often they don't get it. They don't get the instruction they need. And that gets me to the last thing I want you to notice in Mark Seidenberg's definition of the science of reading. So this research has not been incorporated in how teachers are trained for the job or how children are taught. Why? Why hasn't this science been incorporated into how teachers are trained and how children are taught? I'm going to get to that in a moment, but first let me tell you about the other group of people I was learning a lot from when I started to get interested in how kids learn to read. So I was learning a lot from scientists, I was learning a lot from teachers, and I was learning a lot from parents. So I was talking to parents all over the country, parents of kids who struggled to learn how to read, and they were all telling me the same story, like the same story. I'd never had an experience quite like this in my career as a reporter, where the individual stories were all so similar, where the anecdotes were so clearly pointing to a systemic problem. So here's how the story goes from parents, and I bet it's familiar to some of you in this room. Our child started school and we knew something wasn't right. We went to the kindergarten teacher and the teacher said, "Don't worry, make sure you read lots and lots of books to him, everything's gonna be fine." But reading was really hard for this kid. He just didn't seem to get it. We went to the first grade teacher and the teacher said, "Don't worry, all kids learn differently, he's gonna catch up." But he didn't seem to be making much progress. By second grade, he was avoiding reading and he was telling us he didn't want to go to school, and the teacher said, "We just haven't found your child the right book yet. It's all gonna come together in time." And here's what eventually happens if the family has time and money, especially money. The family ends up paying for private testing, which usually costs thousands of dollars. The family also often pays for private tutoring, which can very quickly be more thousands of dollars. The parents of this struggling reader might end up hiring a lawyer to help them fight for the reading instruction that their child needs and is entitled to in federal law to get in school. And all of this is not just expensive, it's exhausting and it's frustrating, and it's really, really, really hard. And the parents begin to realize that their child may never get what he needs in school, or he's not going to get it fast enough because now he's 8 or 9 years old and he is really starting to hate school. And he's falling behind in other subjects because he can't read very well. Maybe he's beginning to act out in school, or maybe this is manifesting as being really quiet and withdrawn and trying to disappear in school. And maybe the child is becoming increasingly anxious and depressed. And this is when if they have the resources, the family pulls their child out of public school. One thing they might do is homeschool their child, or maybe the child figures out a way to come up with the tens of thousands of dollars that it can cost to send the child to a specialized private school if there's a good private school nearby that will let them in. And that's a big if in a lot of parts of this country. So here's the situation, sort of the bottom line. If you can come up with the money to pay for it, you can probably find a way for your struggling reader to be taught how to read. But if you don't have the money and your child is not learning to read in school, what do you do? I think the implications of this are really stunning. If you're from a low or even a middle-income family, there's no safety net. There's no backup if you're not being taught how to read in school. As one mom put it to me, getting help for a struggling reader is a rich man's game. So we're talking about reading, which is the most basic and fundamental skill. It's a foundation upon which academic learning gets built. It's a necessary life skill. That is a rich man's game. So the question became, how did that happen? So starting in 2017, I began to do this series of reporting projects where I tried to explain what I could to answer this question. So hard to read was the first one. This was back in 2017, and I had no idea that I would still be doing this however many, 6 years later, 7. So the documentary in 2017 was about kids with dyslexia and why kids with dyslexia have such a hard time getting the help they need in school. And my big takeaway from that reporting was that kids who have dyslexia were not getting what they need in school because many educators just didn't know how kids learn to read. So they were really stymied by the kids who were struggling the most. I started to think about kids with dyslexia as canaries in the coal mine. They were the ones that were being hurt the most when schools don't know how to teach kids to read. They weren't the only ones being hurt by this, but the damage was sort of most dramatic with that group of children. Then Hard Words came out in 2018, and that was about core classroom reading instruction. So not what needs to be done for dyslexic kids in particular, but rather what do all people need to learn to become good readers? I would describe all of this reporting as pretty basic explanatory journalism. What I mostly did, through the stories of real people, and that's what journalism can bring to the table here, is to explain some of the scientific research on reading. I explained some of the basic things that have been learned by scientists about how kids learn to read. And I explained that a whole lot of teachers don't learn this in their teacher preparation programs. And it was after Hard Words in 2018 that I started to hear from a lot of teachers. In my email, on social media, teachers were telling me, wow, I didn't know this. Why didn't I know this? Why didn't anyone teach this to me? And those are the questions I was beginning to try to answer in 2019 with At a Loss for Words. So in that project, I focused on the theories that people came up with to explain reading and how it works before the 1970s. Before all of this scientific research that I was telling you about at the beginning sort of came onto the scene. And I focused on this one theory in particular that was proposed back in the 1960s. It turns out this theory was proposed by two influential scholars on opposite sides of the world, one here in the United States and one in New Zealand. They didn't know each other at the time when they were developing this theory. They met later and actually disagreed about some of the details, but they proposed the same basic idea at about the same time. And the basic idea is this: when you are a good reader, this is the explanation of skilled reading, when you are a good reader, you are using different kinds of information or cues to identify the words as you go. You are doing things like looking at the first letter, looking at the first couple of letters, thinking of a word that makes sense. You're using context all the time to figure out the words as you go. You might also use the letters and the sounds. That's one way you might figure out the words. But you don't have to use that information, this theory went, because there are other strategies you can use. This became known as the cueing theory. That is not what everyone calls it. And this theory, this sort of explanation for reading and how it works, became foundational to the whole language movement that took off in the 1970s and 80s and became wildly popular in American schools and schools in other parts of the world too. So the basic idea behind whole language was that kids don't have to be taught how to decode the words, and that in fact, teaching kids, taking time to teach kids how to decode words was a problem because it was so laborious and tedious and time-consuming, and it might turn kids off to reading. And so many of the leaders of the whole language movement were really quite hostile to phonics instruction back in the 70s and 80s. But by the late 90s and early 2000s, it was becoming increasingly difficult to justify a very strong anti-phonics stance, because the research was accumulating, there was a growing awareness about this research, and it was clear that you can't be a good reader without good decoding ability. So this is when balanced literacy emerged. And the idea in balanced literacy is to do a little bit of phonics instruction, but to also teach kids that there are other ways they can figure out the words, rooted in that theory that there's all kinds of ways you can figure out the words when you're reading. So what happened with balanced literacy is the cueing theory didn't go away, but phonics became increasingly acceptable and even encouraged, even by people who were once very strongly whole language. And in At a Loss for Words, I explained what's wrong with a little bit of phonics on top of a lot of cueing. So At a Loss for Words, I'd say, is basic explanatory journalism too. And the big aha for me, and I think for a lot of people who listen to it, was that when teachers teach those cueing strategies, it turns out they're actually teaching kids the habits of struggling readers. They are teaching kids the strategies that struggling readers use to get by. That's what the scientific research had shown us, that skilled readers do not actually rely on cues and context to identify the words as they're reading. That's actually how struggling readers read. That's exactly how that student in that class explained her process of trying to get through written text. Struggling readers often have a very hard time with word identification. Too many of the words that they come across are like these little mysteries, series of letters that they don't know and they can't quite figure out. They don't quite know how to figure them out. So they use a bunch of other strategies to try to figure out what the words say. When they come across a word they don't know, they look at the first few letters, they try to think of a word that makes sense. In other words, they use context to try to come up with a word that fits. And when they can't figure out what a word is using context, they skip the word. Often, they can get the gist of what they're reading this way. It's not that they can't read anything at all. They're not illiterate. They just can't, it's too much work to get through the text. And it turns out that using context, guessing and skipping words, that is what reading is like when you're a skilled reader. So that's one of the things that cognitive scientists figured out, is that there is a key difference between skilled readers and unskilled readers. And a big key difference is that skilled readers can immediately and accurately recognize words. They don't have to guess or predict or use context. They don't need a lot of other strategies. And it turns out that once you're a skilled reader, you know tens of thousands of words instantly on sight. In fact, if you're a skilled reader, your brain has gotten so good at reading the words that you process the word book faster than you process a picture of a book. So the question is, how does your brain get so good at that? So it happens through this process that is known as orthographic mapping. I think it's really important to understand just a little bit about this process because it helps people understand why teaching kids how to decode words is so important, and for understanding why teaching kids those cueing strategies is not a good idea. So here's a really quick and simplified explanation of orthographic mapping. It's basically the process we use to store printed words in our long-term memory. The way you do it is by attending closely to how a written word is spelled and then looking at that sequence of letters and connecting it to the word's pronunciation and its meaning. So there are three things at play here. So a child knows the meaning and pronunciation of the word cat, for example, and the word will get orthographically mapped into her memory when she's able to link the sounds k, at, to the written word cat. So that requires an awareness of the speech sounds and words, that's phonemic awareness, and it requires an understanding of how those sounds are represented by letters, that's phonics. So you need phonemic awareness and phonics to orthographically map words into your long-term memory. And once a word has been mapped into your long-term memory, you know it instantly on sight. In fact, you can't suppress your ability to read the word. So you're not consciously sounding out the word when you see it, but you know the word instantly because at some point, probably when you were in kindergarten or first grade, you successfully sounded out that word and you linked the spelling of the word in your mind with the meaning and the pronunciation of that word. So by about second grade, a typically developing reader who has good phonics skills usually needs just a few exposures to a word through its pronunciation, its spelling, and its meaning, and bam, that word gets mapped to her memory. Now, some kids need lots and lots of exposure to words to do that, but others don't need very much. The more words that you can map into your memory this way, the more you can focus on the meaning of what you're reading, right? Because you're not using your brain power to identify the words, you're using your brain power to understand what you're reading, and that's the goal, for readers to understand what they're reading. So the final reporting project on this slide is What the Words Say, and that was in 2020. And that one focuses a lot on how and why reading achievement tends to be, on average, associated with family income and also with race. And the data is really shocking. And I know all of you know this data. One example, more than half of Black fourth graders are below basic in reading. We're not talking about proficient here, below basic. So imagine a class of 20 Black kids in fourth grade. I know there are classes just like that in Oakland. Half of them are below basic. Only 4 of them are proficient readers. So part of what is going on here has to do with poverty, obviously. Unfortunately, in this country, Black children and other children of color are more likely to grow up in poverty than white children. And poverty absolutely plays a role when it comes to reading comprehension, especially on the language comprehension side of things. But this is bigger than poverty. There are more kids struggling with reading in this country than struggling with poverty. And I think we've been blaming poverty when part of what's going on here has to do with wealth. So some kids are lucky enough to be born into families that can take care of the problem if they are not taught how to read in school. They have a safety net, and the safety net is their parents and their parents' checkbooks. Some kids are getting the instruction that they need, but a lot of kids aren't. They aren't being taught how to read in school, and they depend on school. They need to be taught how to read in school. So this brings me to Sold a Story. So Sold a Story is investigative journalism. Sometimes people use the phrase accountability journalism. So this was my effort, along with an amazing reporter that we hired to help, whose name is Christopher Peak. We were trying to get to the bottom of how and why it happened that many schools were teaching reading in a way that didn't align with decades of scientific research. So in an investigative reporting project, you have people who are being harmed. And in Sold a Story, you don't just learn that kids and families are being harmed. I think what you learn is that teachers are being harmed too. I think teachers are harmed when they are not given good information about how kids learn to read. Also, in an investigative project, you have to figure out how people were harmed and why and who harmed them. And in Sold a Story, we focus on 4 authors and 1 publishing company. They were not the only ones who were selling this queuing theory, but they were the most successful at it. We tell you that in episode 1 of Sold a Story. There are 6 episodes, plus 2 episodes that came out last spring, and 2 more episodes that are coming in April. Also, we just translated a version of Sold a Story into Spanish, and this is coming in 2 weeks. So now I'm going to move on to the third and final part of this talk. What's happened in response to Sold a Story and where to go from here? So I have no idea who said this, but I really like this quote. It says, "A story's most important function is to remind us we are not alone in the world." And I think Sold a Story is having an impact because there are so many people who see themselves in the story. Maybe they're a teacher, maybe they're a parent, maybe they were a kid who struggled to read. Since the podcast, at least 15 states have passed new laws regarding reading instruction, so there are a lot of policymakers who have listened. And I have to say that a lot of these laws focus on curriculum, and in some cases ban queuing and the queuing strategies. And I have mixed feelings about these laws and some of the efforts to hasten the change. If you listen to the episodes that came out last spring, you can hear me and my co-reporter Christopher Peak talking about our reaction to these laws. Here's my bottom line concern. I think curriculum may be part of the problem, but buying a new curriculum may not be the answer. It's certainly not the whole answer, right? The reason we focused on Sold a Story, on the authors of curriculum and the company that sells that curriculum, is because there are ideas about how kids learn to read embedded in curriculum, right? And what we realized is that lots of teachers were absorbing these ideas about how kids learn to read from the curriculum. They didn't necessarily know they were absorbing these ideas about how kids learn to read from the curriculum, and they didn't know that these ideas weren't right, because many of them didn't know. Many teachers didn't know how kids learn to read. What I hope is that this reporting is doing is helping to establish a national reset on how kids are taught that is being formed by a more sophisticated understanding of how kids actually learn to read. I think there's really a reckoning going on. That's actually the name of one of the Sold a Story episodes, The Reckoning. What I can see is that this reporting has helped to tear something down, something that I think needed to be torn down, something that many scientists and others were trying to tear down for decades. But the big question, of course, now, and I think many of you are here for this reason, is what replaces it? What to do next? So I want to go back to that definition from Mark Seidenberg of the science of reading. So another part of this definition, the science of reading research has important implications for helping children to succeed. And I think that's a significant word choice, implications. So the science of reading is not a way to teach reading. As I said before, it's not a curriculum, it's not a product, it's not a thing that you do, it's not a law that can be passed. The implications of the science of reading have to be translated into practice. And that is what is happening now in real time in schools, which are very, very complex systems. And it's not easy, and it's not always clear what to do or how to do it. Mark Seidenberg has been writing about this. I recommend his website. It's called Reading Matters. And this is a post that he wrote a couple of years ago. The science of reading is a work in progress. Here's what he wrote. Connecting research and educational practice is essential. The ongoing effort to make this happen is a landmark development. However, education is a massive enterprise with numerous stakeholders. Creating the paths to meaningful change is difficult. Course corrections may be necessary along the way. I think one of the things that we talked about in one of our episodes last spring is this thing called a pre-mortem. So shout out to Claude Goldenberg and Margaret Goldberg, who I think are both here, who wrote an article that included this pre-mortem idea. So a pre-mortem, as opposed to a post-mortem, a pre-mortem is something you do before you put a plan into place, before the person dies, right? To try to prevent that from happening. You do it before you put a plan in place to try to prevent the plan from failing. So this is something that schools and districts could do as they're changing the way they teach kids to read. So in a pre-mortem, you bring everyone together who is involved in the change, and the people in charge lay out their change plan. And then everyone involved has to try to transport themselves into the future and imagine that the plan has completely, totally failed. It didn't work at all. And the question is why? Why did it fail? Think of all the reasons why it could fail. And then go back to the plan and amend it and try to prevent this failure that is possible, this failure that is maybe even probable. I really want schools to succeed. I want all of you in this room to succeed at whatever part of this that you're working on. I don't know if schools are going to succeed or exactly how, but I really want them to succeed. I'm a journalist, but I'm also a citizen, and I'm a community member, and I'm a mom, and I hope I'll be a grandma someday, and I want kids to be better readers. And getting more kids to be better readers is not just about changing the way kids are taught to read words. This is the thing that's kind of mind-blowing. Teaching kids how to read the words might be the easier part here. And I think as schools really dig into this work, they are realizing that more and more. The language comprehension part is really, really complex, and it's so critical. Everyone has to be paying attention to all of the parts here. And I think it's really important for everyone to stay humble and curious in this endeavor to get reading instruction right, and to stay open to course correction, like Mark Seidenberg said. And to never believe so deeply in something or someone that you can't or aren't willing to question it. So I'm going to leave you with a reading list. I don't even know where we are on time. I'm going to leave you with a reading list. So these are some of the books, just some of the books and articles that have taught me the most over the past several years. You can find this on the Sold a Story website. It's soldastory.org. And please keep an eye out for Sold a Story in Spanish. It's coming, I believe, on March 16th, and we're going to be working with Univision to distribute it on their podcast, actually. So I'm hoping that'll get it out to a lot of parents in particular. It's a modified, we've got the entire podcast down to 1 hour translate it into Spanish, and then we do a second episode, which is particularly looking at these questions of what does this mean for kids who speak Spanish at home but are learning to read English in school. And we have a wonderful Spanish language host who herself has a 4-year-old son and is trying to figure all this out. And then we have 2 new episodes coming in early April, and there will be more after that. I feel like my job as a journalist is to stay on this story, so I've been working on ways to be able to continue to do that. I want to know where change is going well. I want to be able to document that. I also want to know where things aren't going well. What are the course corrections that schools and districts are finding that they have to make along the way? I think this is really, really important stuff to document and question and to show good examples so that the rest of the country can learn from those of you who are finding success. So thank you all for being part of it. I think everyone has a role to play here. I know there are people who represent various roles in this room. So thanks for being here today and for listening, and I hope you have a great conference. Thank you.